Society Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Gilad Avrahami. I'm the Programs and Development Coordinator here at HMTC. This podcast is a production of the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center of Nassau County. On today's episode of The Past Has an Afterlife, here on HMTV, my special guest, Dr. Linda Burghardt, will join me for a conversation about the HMTC Book Club and the power of historical fiction to open doors for learning about the Holocaust. Linda, it's such a pleasure to have you on the program. You have a lot of different roles. You're the scholar in residence here at HMTC. You manage the library, you give lectures, you do so many different things here. And one of the most important, persistent, something that a lot of people have had the chance to take part in is the book club. And we're actually marking a significant occasion today and this month because the book club meets once a month. It's been doing so since late 2021. And this month will be the 50th book, the 50th session, which is an astonishing achievement. And the not least of which for me is the fact that I think if I were to read a book about the Holocaust every single month, I don't know whether my nerves, my emotions would be able to take it, but I also imagine it gives you a great deal of wisdom and strength and depth of spirit. And I was wondering, because for me, I've read a couple of Holocaust books, like some really good ones. And they were, because it was just one, I was able to focus on it and then just set it aside once I had gone through it. And it was like going through it, such a long journey and then coming to the end of it. But if doing so over and over, what's the difference between just reading one book about the Holocaust and reading a whole bookshelf full or several bookshelves full over and over and over again?
Well, I read one at a time. And as I read it, I go into the story. I go into the characters' lives and minds. And I forget about everything else I've ever read. Reading has always transported me, which is one of the things I love about it. So once I realize how many I've read, they all, after a while, reinforce each other. And I find them encouraging and thrilling. And I know people ask me this, like, don't you get depressed reading about this? But people survived. People came through, and including my parents. And so every book I read, I learn something new, and it attaches itself to the other things I've learned.
Can you show us, you brought with you a picture of many of the books that you've gone through now in the book club. I wonder if you could just show it to us.
Sure.
And
This is the end of the third year. I took out all 36 books. I put them on the floor, took a picture, and it just, all taken together, they look to me like just a sea of wisdom. Historical fiction, when it's good, does that. When it's not good, it's a big problem because people sometimes believe things that aren't true. So every book that I use for the book club, I read at least twice. First time to see whether it's a good story, whether you can relate to the characters, and then I check all the facts, every single one. Because if even one is wrong, then the whole book ends up being less powerful. So they're all worthwhile, every one that we've used. Not every one is popular.
Sure.
Some of our book clubs where the people did not like the book are very wonderful book clubs. We have a lot to discuss. We always discuss whether we learned anything from the book, and everyone can identify with different characters and have a different experience.
Right. How does it work once you actually get to the discussion of the book club? Does everyone who comes to the book club, do they really read it in advance? And then what happens? What does that hour look like?
I think most people read the book in advance, but I'm not sure. Not everybody. And we tend to have a number of people who want to talk a lot. So I always come in with 4 or 5 single-spaced pages of notes and questions. And I rarely get past the first page because I'll start with the first question and right away the little yellow hands go up. And the people who aren't all that good on the computer will be like this. And so I call on everybody, we get all their comments, then people's comments on other people's comments, and it just goes like that. And when there's, if it ever becomes quiet, which is rare, I just bring up another question, and then there are more discussions.
Right. One of the most important messages of Holocaust education has been the need to ground it deeply in historical fact.
Yes.
And to convey to our center's visitors that these events really did happen. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you check every fact because of how important that is. Right. But can you walk me through the value of using only works of literature in your book club, which is to say they might be partially fictional or, you know, it's historical fiction. It might be based on someone's life. It might not be based on someone's life. But the creative liberties that are taken to write a book and to write in a literary format. And how does that enhance our understanding of the Holocaust?
Well, I'll start with the idea that literature professors will tell you in most or many of your courses, I would think, that when you read nonfiction, you're getting facts. You're getting facts. You're getting figures. When you read fiction, you're getting truth. And so, to me, that's a tremendous difference. Sometimes it's emotional truth. It's always truth about the Holocaust. But when you go through people's experiences with them, you go through the Holocaust as it happened. You know, a number of years ago, I gave a talk in Manchester, England, at a UN conference. And the fellow who was running it told me that in England, there's two types of history that they teach. One is military history, and the other is social history. And I thought, aha, this makes sense to me, because the Holocaust books, the literature about the Holocaust is the emotional, social history of the people, as opposed to who's in power and how they got there. Mm-hmm. And so you learn a great deal from reading historical fiction. You know, there's the poet Muriel Rukeyser. You may know her. She once said that the world is made up not of atoms, but of stories. And that's always been true to me.
Wow. I sort of think about history class where, as you're saying, the most important thing from the perspective of a class you might take in school, at least the history side of it, is to learn about the important milestones that changed history. So it requires a very good understanding of the macro in the world. And you do lose a lot when you do that. And there's a movement to have English classes, which is more to the point of what you're talking about, being able to look at individual stories and understand the context of history, and to make sure that English and history classes talk about the same topics around the same time, so that you get almost a mirror, a reflection backwards and forwards, macro and micro, the world and the person, the relationship between these. And then from our perspective as a human who's living in the world, to be able to make sense of that dichotomy, those two things, and to easily move backwards and forwards between those, to when you're hearing about a historical event, to be able to imagine the individual story. When you're thinking about, you hear an individual story, to understand what that meant in the context of the world. Right.
When you read fiction that's well done with the narrative arc and the story being in the correct shape and the characters developing, you really feel like you were there. It's so easy to fall into the lives of the characters, and it's a very powerful way of learning. It takes time, though. It's part of the problem with school.
Right, true. Yeah. And then at the center, we have an exhibit that talks about the big moments and the development of the laws and the actions that enabled the Holocaust to take place. But one of the things I also find remarkable about how we do it, and I think is kind of essential to it, is that when we have the opportunity, we have a survivor or a 2G or someone to talk about individual stories. And even if it's not the person themselves who's telling it, we have artifacts that have a story behind them that we know it's a Long Island family who had something in the attic for a long time, and the way that got to the place where it is today.
Right.
And I think that for kids, when they come into the center, for them to have an opportunity to do that moving backwards and forwards as well, and to see that there are stories attached to it is important. So how does that compare, I suppose, to the process of reading a book from start to finish? It might not be someone you know, I know occasionally you have people who wrote the book come to the book club and speak if they can, and that has another layer. But what is that process like, and what do you feel by the end of the book that you have gained, beyond just a general feeling of having a new layer, a new wisdom, that you've gained from journeying with that person throughout their story?
Yes, well, they certainly learn what it was like to, we just read a book about the Warsaw Ghetto, and what was it like actually being there, as opposed to merely reading about a historian's view. And historians are wonderful. I mean, my PhD is in Holocaust history, but a lot of historians fail at really telling you what really happened, what people felt like. And so when you can get into the lives of individual people, you can identify with them, and it's so much more real and powerful, and you just learn so much more. Now, a lot of our books have actual wisdom in them when it's a good author. I mean, the postcard, which is our 50th book, so here it is. This is by Anne Berest, and she's a French author. She has this wonderful line in there where the father in the family is talking to his children in the 1920s and says, it's time to go. They're in Poland. It's time to go. And he's going to Palestine. And his son says, I can't go to Palestine. I mean, it's a Jewish family, obviously. But he says, I don't believe in God. And the father says, it doesn't matter if you don't believe in God. It matters if God believes in you. And I love that line. And that's just a little piece of wisdom that comes out of reading fiction you're never going to get from a historian, right? But it's something about the human experience. And that's what we're all living. And we all want to do it as well as we can.
Sure. I mean, when we talk to people around us about the little nuggets of wisdom we've learned in life, sometimes those are things that we take directly from our experiences. Sometimes they're things we learn from other people.
Yes.
And it does require a word, a line that sticks with you. It could be something from a book. It could be something from something you've watched. It could be something that was told to you at one moment. But there's nothing very strictly historical about it necessarily. But it can guide you through your life, right?
Right. Yes. Very much so.
I was wondering if we could take a minute to go into your story, your place in this, because I know that you came from a family that survived the Holocaust, and that in the same way that authors have, especially if it's a story of their own family, have used literature as a medium to carry it down. In our this podcast, we're calling it "The Past Has an Afterlife," and the reason is that there are almost two different segments of. I don't even know. Segments doesn't feel like the right way, but to understand what happens with the past. The first is the actual events as they happen, and the second is the way that we remember it. The second is where it travels afterwards, are remnants of the past that do endure and that do linger or do guide us in the future. And I had asked you to bring in an artifact that had a meaning to you, that was from your past, and that gave you maybe a little nugget of wisdom like what we're talking about, that's a little hard to capture in facts, but that has that. So can you show us what you brought and what it means to you?
Sure, okay. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things about the past. You know that quote from Faulkner, the past isn't even, the past is not the past, it's not even over. And it just goes on. I mean, we live on several levels at the same time. It's very multi-layered. Now, my parents, when they left Vienna, they had recently been married. They got married on July 31st, 1938, which is significant because it was the last day the Jews were allowed to marry in Vienna. And my mother had papers, and my father didn't. And by marrying her, he came over. So it gave her a certain amount of power in the family. My family were not big talkers. Well, they were big talkers. They would talk about what they ate the day before and whose hair color was different than the last time and what new shoes were in style and so on. But they didn't talk about anything that mattered. However, since they fled, they brought very little. But my father was a great motorcycle driver. He won these 2 medals in 1931 for winning cross-country motorcycle races. And he took these with him. There wasn't too much they could bring, but he brought these. And he wasn't the kind of guy who would sit down and have a talk with you, like the Dutch uncle talk. Let me tell you about life. It's like, no, you had to learn everything from observation. My father learned English by studying motorcycle manuals. And he had a great love of cars. My mother was not allowed to drive because he didn't believe women should drive. He didn't want me to drive, but wasn't going to stop me. But he didn't help either. But nevertheless, I grew up with seeing these medals and thinking about what they did for him. They validated him. They gave him something to love. They would have given him a profession had he been able to stay and make his life in Vienna, where he had connections and knew his way around. He came to the U.S., and HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, put him into watchmaking. So he became a watchmaker. Never liked it, but he had a good job. We had food. We had, clothes and roof overhead, and so on. But what these things are, to me, they're symbols of achievement, right? Cross-country motorcycle racing, it sounds crazy to me, like, wow, it sounds very hard. On the other hand, once my parents came here, they never got to do any of those things again. They used to ski in Vienna. They went to the opera. They did all these wonderful middle-class things that they got to do based on their age and the time they lived. They couldn't do any of it here. All they could do was work and try to keep everything going for the family. We were comfortable, everything was smooth, but there was a tremendous sense of loss. My mother lost her parents to Auschwitz. She never got over it. My father lost his motorcycle. The night the Nazis came, took the motorcycle, and then they took the car, and he never had that sense of achievement again or that sense of fun or freedom. His youth was over.
And then that means these objects that stayed with him, because he didn't talk about it, right? He just...
Very little.
Very little.
Yes.
So what do you think it meant then? I mean, he took, like you said, remarkably few objects, and that was what he took. And in a way, that's part of how the past carries on, is the things that we choose to keep and the things that we don't choose to keep.
Right.
Say a lot about our choices, about our values, about our how we remember what happened in the past. And he didn't want to keep on to that proof of sorts that he had achieved something.
That was then lost. So I'd say that the major emotion in our family was loss and grief. And it was basically unspoken unless you kind of knew a little bit of the way in. I learned German because my parents spoke to each other in German. Of course, talking about me, I wanted to know what they were saying. And so I could pick up some from that. But one of the reasons that working here is so satisfying to me is I get to study the Holocaust on so many levels, through fiction, through the research that I do. And I learn what my parents went through. I learn about their past. And it fills out so many of the holes in my life. Why am I like this? Well, I got it from them. The past is still with us, very, very powerfully and loudly. Yeah.
In this book club, there are a lot of people who come every time. Some people have been coming from the beginning, right?
Yes.
And they must have something inside of them as well. A lot of them are also families of survivors or people who are struggling with their own, not necessarily struggling, just they look back at the past because it helps them to understand their own family or their own sense of place in the world.
Yes.
And I wonder if you see certain messages coming out in the book club, and whether that's a reflection in any way of what are people thinking about now? Because I think the power of fiction as well, whether it's fiction that was written today or fiction that was written in the past, is that the way that what we learn from it, the lessons that we take from it, say a lot to us as well. Just in the same way as any artifact does, the things that we keep, the things that we decide to remember, and the things that we decide to discard. The same with how we read stories and how we tell stories and how we talk about stories tells us a lot about ourselves as well. So what do you notice? Are there any patterns that have emerged, or messages, or how do people react when they read these stories?
Oh, there's a lot of sadness. Sometimes people want to veer off into their own lives and their own stories, and
Well, that's already something that tells you a lot, right?
It does, exactly.
Yeah.
I listen for a little while, but I think to myself, this is not a therapy session. Let's get back to the book. So I just will say that, and then somebody else will pick up on something. People are thirsty for knowledge. The people who come to the book group, they're thirsty. They want to know what happened. They want to try to understand why. They want to help assuage the fear that it'll happen again. And if you understand the past, there's a better chance that it won't happen. It won't repeat itself. And that's a lot of it. For some people, book groups it's a way to gossip. You can say anything you want about the characters, just like you're discussing your friends or your frenemies. And so there's a lot of that. Oh, do you believe that she did that? And then we'd get into why and what's underneath it and the nuance and tie it to the story, the narrative arc, where the author is taking us. There's a lot of desire to know and to then be able to share with others. And this is a way that people learn. And the thing with fiction is that it's an easy way into a difficult subject. It's very hard to read a great deal of Holocaust fact. It's so awful. But the fiction that I choose always has survivors in it. We never have a book where everybody dies at the end. There are always people who survive. For my PhD, I studied the survivors. And it's really uplifting to find out how they did it. And so that's a big part of what happens in the books, and it's a big part of why people keep coming back to the book club, because it's a chance to learn in a comfortable way what actually happened.
Yeah, almost all literature has a happy ending of sorts. It might not be
Of
perfectly
sorts.
happy, but I think the idea is that we need from our books to find a way forward, like you're saying.
Yes, that's very well put. That's exactly right. Yes.
It's part of why we read. We need to understand, if I were in that situation, what should I do? Okay, maybe the character didn't do the right thing the first time, but eventually they did the right thing. Or eventually they found out what needed to happen or how to change themselves, how to change the world around them. And then that gives them the strength, the reader the strength to do that themselves, because a book that just tells you there's nothing you can do doesn't help you an awful lot.
Well, there's some literary fiction that does tell you that.
Yeah.
But that's it. We don't read purely literary fiction because it's too dark. And the subject matter is so dark to begin with. You need people who you can relate to as human beings. The problem we have is that sometimes there's a Nazi that does some good. How do you deal with that? And so it gives us a chance to talk about the multi-layered motives of people, the multi-layered personalities we have, and is there anyone who's totally good or totally evil? Well, that's one of the things that we talk about.
Right. I suppose it's an avenue in a topic where it feels that things are so black and white. In a lot of ways they are.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But to have the chance to work through all those lingering questions, basically, because we emerged from World War II not with a perfect world where the evil was defeated,
right,
but a very complicated world where there were a lot of people who were in legally and morally grayer areas, and we had to figure out a way to deal with that. And literature maybe offers a chance in a kind of manufactured slightly, right? Like an alternative version where you're not talking about real people, you're not offending real people, but to just sit through those difficult questions that are almost too difficult to do when it's about your own self, your own family, right?
Yes, very true. And very difficult to do in today's world. So that's a whole other thing. And we get into that sometimes, the parallels, and other times it gets shut down. There's some people who don't want to talk about it. And of course, there are different, political views. We have a whole range of ages and different ways that people deal with the world. So try to stay away from too much from politics. But when people are afraid, they want to know more to try to be less fearful.
Right. What's in store for the book club going forward? Are you going to just keep on keeping on? Do you have any? Any special ideas for something you'd like to do, or is it you feel like it's the way that you've been doing it so far? People are just excited for more.
It's very eclectic, and people often recommend books. This book, for example, was recommended by one of the members, and the one we did last month also. And so I always follow up with that. I'm always trying to expand what we talk about, and I'm also always looking for books about Vienna, because there aren't many. Vienna is one of these very understudied places. Hitler came in, took it over, that was that, and there's not that much written, there's nowhere near as much written about Austria as about Germany, of course. So I'm tending toward looking in those directions.
Got it. Well, I look forward to joining in the future in the book club. I hope our listeners will check it out as well if you haven't. They're every single month, usually around the middle of the month.
Right.
And if you have a chance, even if you can't join the book club, to pick up the book if you see it or to order it, then I hope that you learn something very powerful from it, just like I know you do every single month.
Yes.
So thank you, Linda. It was such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of The Past Has an Afterlife on HMTV. I'd like to thank my guest, Linda Burghardt, for sharing about the HMTC Book Club on the occasion of its 50th book. If you enjoyed exploring the information, history, and stories in today's conversations, be sure to check out our other podcasts here on HMTV. Please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.